Greetings, everyone. I want to welcome you to the 29th Annual Issues and Answers Forum, and I can't believe it's been 29 years. I haven't done all 29, but I've been able to moderate the last few, and it's been a real honor, so it's a treat to be here. This event is brought to you by tonight's sponsors, the Glenwood Springs Chamber Resort Association, the Glenwood Springs Post-Independent, KMTS, Cable Channel 10, and local State Farm insurance agents Jeff Leonard and Dee McCown. A special thanks to the City of Glenwood Springs for allowing us to broadcast live from City Hall. This event is being broadcast live on Cable Channel 10. It'll be rebroadcast on October 18th, 19th, 21st, 24th, and 31st at noon, 7 p.m. at midnight on Cable Channel 10. A video of this forum will be available at glenwoodchamber.com. It's also being broadcast, a portion of it, on KMTS and being broadcast as well on KDNK. If you have questions you would like to ask of the candidates or issue representatives, please write them down on one of the forms provided on the table outside and bring them up to the question box in the front row. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible within the time restrictions. As the moderator, I will ask the questions of the candidates and issue representatives. Each candidate or issue representative will give a 2-minute opening statement. There will be a time limit of 1 minute assigned for answering questions. Each representative will be allowed a 1-minute closing statement. Tonight's timer is Susie Strauss. Thank you, Susie. She'll hold up a card reminding tonight's speakers that they have 30 seconds left to answer a question and also let them know when their time is up. A reminder to candidates and those speaking about issues, resist the temptation to adjust the microphone. Just speak in a normal tone of voice so that people watching at home and listening online, so it's not distorted, because these mics are pretty sensitive. Just a reminder. The order for tonight: Colorado Proposition 104, Amendment 68, Colorado Proposition 105, Colorado's 3rd Congressional District, U.S. Senate, Colorado House District 57, and then the debate between Garfield County Commissioner candidates Tom Jankowski and Michael Sullivan. As the moderator, I will read statements on behalf of the Issue Committee for Sunshine and on Government, favoring Proposition 104 and local schools, local choices, opposing Prop 104. Reminder, I'm in no way endorsing either of these committees. That's why I'm moderate. The Issue Committee for Sunshine on Government, in favor. Dear Glenwood Springs Chamber and others, secrecy is the enemy of good government. Fortunately, here in Colorado, we have developed a strong tradition of transparency and open government so that citizens can see how their tax dollars are being used. In the early 1970s, over the objections of many in government, we passed laws to make government records open for public review and required meetings to be open for all to see under the Open Meetings Law, which is part of the Colorado Sunshine Law. We also passed bills in recent years that provide greater transparency and accountability in state government by highlighting state spending and making that information available for public praise or scrutiny. One transparency issue, however, that has been killed year after year in the Colorado legislature would have mandated open meetings between school boards and employee unions during the collective bargaining process. With a few district exceptions, the majority of negotiations are held in secret behind closed doors. What's not so secret is that the teachers' unions help kill these bills in the legislature. Unfortunately, there seems to be an inherent fear of transparency by those on whom the light will shine. The transparency that Proposition 104 provides for is not complicated. It simply requires that the negotiations between teachers and union representatives and school boards, school administrations, be open for anyone to attend and observe. The single most important task of an elected school board is negotiating the collective bargaining agreement with union representatives. That's because these agreements negotiate the spending of up to 85% of a school district's budget. That budget comes from your tax dollars. These negotiations should be held in open meetings because they will not only determine how taxpayers' monies will be spent, but also how our children will be taught and how our teachers will be treated. Doesn't it seem fair that these negotiations should be held in the open, allowing anyone to attend? Consider this. Wouldn't it be unthinkable to let the state legislature debate and pass the majority of the state's operating budget in a closed back room where no reporters or citizens could observe the process? Prop 104 merely amends Colorado's open meetings law, saying that meetings between boards of education or school district administration, along with union representatives at which a collective bargaining agreement is discussed, must be open to the public. That's all. Open meetings procedures are important because they allow all stakeholders to keep an eye on the negotiating table. For instance, teachers can observe how both sides represent their interests regarding pay and working conditions. Parents can see directly how the policies affecting their children's teachers and classroom policies are discussed and decided. And the public can observe how decisions regarding how 85% of a school district's budget, which comes from taxpayers, are made. This isn't a new idea. 11 other states have similar laws that require open negotiations. A handful of school districts in Colorado have already chosen to provide this openness without any problems. But all school districts should be required to make these meetings open to the public. Transparency is more essential than secrecy. Shining the light on government actions is crucial for democracy to work. This change to statute doesn't threaten local control. The process remains the same. It's just done in public. Taxpayers, teachers, and most important, our children deserve clean, transparent government. Our kids deserve a little sunshine. Let's open the door with Prop 104. Please join the Denver Post, the Greeley Tribune, the Pueblo Chieftain, the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Durango Herald, teachers, taxpayers, and parents, and vote yes on Proposition 104. For more information, please visit the website at sunshine.org and like us on Facebook. Thank you for listening to the Issue Committee for Sunshine on Government. Now the opposing side to 104. Dear Glenwood Springs Chamber Resort Association, local schools, local choices believe that Proposition 104 is a classic good politics, bad policy initiative. Transparency is popular among Coloradans and is a good thing for government, but this measure is so overly broad it will negatively impact how Colorado school districts operate. We believe that Coloradans should do their homework on this potentially harmful measure so that they can make an informed decision this November. Proposition 104 calls for all discussions about collective bargaining agreements between districts and their employees to be open to the public. This broad, vague wording could mean that everyday conversations that occur between teachers and administrators about things like snow days, student schedules, and professional development could also have to be made open to the public. Oversight is important, but this proposal doesn't just cover negotiations about how tax dollars are spent. It will require public meetings for almost everything regarding an individual teacher's job. If that one word were changed to negotiation, then this would be an entirely different ballot measure. The principle of local control is extremely important in a state like Colorado. And this measure strips away the local control that school districts need to best serve their students and community. What is good for one school is not always good for all schools. Rural districts, in particular, don't need another unfunded mandate forced on them from a Denver special interest. It should also be noted that no additional funding will be provided for local school districts to pay for the increased bureaucracy and legal bills that would be required to comply with this new mandate. It's important for Coloradans to do their homework about Proposition 104 because it doesn't really make the grade. To learn more, visit getthefactson104.com. Sincerely, local schools, local choices. Now move on to Amendment 68. And we have Tim Pollard speaking on behalf of Amendment 68, Coloradans for Better Schools, and Steve Durham opposing Amendment 68. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Pollard, we'll begin with you, a 2-minute statement.
Good evening. Thanks to the Glenwood Chamber for organizing this event tonight and all of you for coming out. I appreciate the time. I'm hoping that when we're done here tonight, you'll join me in supporting Amendment 68, which I think really will improve the state economy and increase funding for K-12 public education and charter schools across the state without a tax hike and without cutting existing services. Amendment 68 will increase K-12 public and charter school funding by more than $114 million each year by permitting expanded limited gaming at the Arapahoe Horse Park, where wagering and racing have existed for decades. That figure will only increase each year, particularly if live horse racing is expanded into Mesa and Pueblo counties, which this amendment would allow. Now, Amendment 68 certainly is not the sole solution that will address our K-12 funding issues. But it is an innovative approach in managing the complex funding challenges plaguing our state. Over the past 6 years, Colorado public and charter schools have endured more than $1 billion in funding cuts. Colorado public and charter schools rank near the bottom among all U.S. states in public per-pupil funding for education. I think none of us are very proud of that. Amendment 68 will help us close this funding gap. The amendment recognizes that local school districts can best determine local needs, which is why it spells out a formula for the money to go directly to our local school boards on a per-pupil basis, not through the education bureaucracy in Denver, not through a giant state budget, but directly to our local school boards. Amendment 68 is a nonpartisan idea and concept, bridging the values our state places on K-12 education as well as responsible fiscal policy. A yes vote stands for improving our education funding in addition to improving our state and local economies. An assessment by the Innovation Group is a firm that also conducts market research for the same casinos for opposing Amendment 68, says that if Amendment 68 passes, it will be a net benefit to our state's economy of $468 million and create about 2,000 new jobs. And that's why I believe 135,000 voters in this state signed a petition to put Amendment 68 on the ballot, while we have 4,000 individual members of our campaign committee, including about 500 teachers, who think, well, this is not a one-stop solution to our education funding issues. It is a good stopgap measure to fund some of our highest priority things that are just not being taken care of right now.
Mr. Durham, 2 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening, and thank you to the sponsors for organizing this event. Amendment 68 is being sold to the public as a partial solution to an alleged shortage of education funding. It is important, I think, to evaluate the effect of Amendment 68 on education funding by taking a look at the positions taken by those who have the greatest stake in increased education funding. And let's look for a moment at the positions taken by the Colorado Association of School Boards, which is to oppose Amendment 68, and the Colorado PTA, which is also to oppose Amendment 68. 2 groups with no economic interest in the outcome of this question, as Mr. Pollard and I both have. 2 independent views, and you will also find that there are really no significant supporters among any education groups or individual school boards for this proposition. The second problem with Amendment 68 is that it is as close to special legislation as you can get. The casino that will be built if this passes in Arapahoe County will be built without any vote of the people of Arapahoe County as to whether or not they want this casino, this 2,500 minimum slot machine Las Vegas style casino in their neighborhood. The neighborhood groups in and around where this casino will be located have opposed this, and they hope that the state of Colorado and you will also oppose it so you don't force this down their throats. And finally, let me say, I suspect I'm about to run out of time, but only one company can qualify for this license. Only one. And so this amendment has the effect of writing that company into the Colorado Constitution. Thank you.
We have a series of questions. We'll begin with Mr. Pollard. Some 1-minute response, and then you'll have a 1-minute rebuttal, and then we'll alternate. First question: when established horse tracks around the country are struggling, why would voters believe that someone could successfully start a horse track from scratch and operate it for 5 years, thus allowing a casino in Mesa or Pueblo County? Mr. Pollard.
It's a good question. I think a good example of one that has been successful for several decades is Arapahoe Park in Arapahoe County. Mesa County, Montrose County, several other western slope counties have had horse racing on and off for years, but really without the capital and funding behind it to make it successful. There's a really old and rich horse culture, especially in Mesa County, which I'm more familiar with than Pueblo for sure, and a real organized group of people who still do quarter horse racing, but who haven't had kind of the ability before to really put together a long-term sustainable operation. I think this will allow us to do that, because we'll have some funding and investment from folks outside who do eventually obviously want to build a convenience-type casino, and will help make sure that the horse park is successful.
Mr. Durham, 1 minute.
Thank you. Animal racing throughout the United States is a dying industry. The last dog track in Colorado has closed, and this past year the legislature enacted legislation to forbid them from reopening. Horse tracks around the country have not done well, and they are failing because there is simply a lack of interest in animal racing. The Arapahoe Park they struggle to do a 30-day meet. On occasions, they've asked to have the length of that meet reduced. It's very difficult, and I think there's no reason to presume that you can sustain the funding for a losing proposition and what is bound to be a losing proposition, particularly in less populated parts of Colorado for a period of 5 years.
Rebuttal?
I haven't seen Steve's economic analysis, so it's hard to rebut parts of his statement, but the reality is that Arapahoe Park has been a functioning and profitable enterprise for literally decades. So I don't agree with his assessment there. And I also don't agree with his assessment that being near a population center, a large urban center, is necessary for sustainability. I think it's more important to have a rich sort of agrarian horse culture and county fair system that supports that type of pursuit. I think we have that in Mesa County. And I've had several discussions with horseman groups and racing groups over there. They're really excited about the possibility of having 30-plus days of racing in Mesa County. And they're going to do everything in their power as local citizens who want to see this sport return to the area to make that happen.
Mr. Durham, Amendment 68 provides additional money for public schools without raising income, property, or sales taxes on individuals or businesses. What's wrong with more money for education?
There's nothing wrong with more money for education, but I think you have to ask yourself the question, why do the education groups either not support or oppose this amendment? And the answer, I think, is really a simple one. I've been involved in trying to help a school district pass a bond issue, and I was working with the superintendent, and early in the campaign, I asked him, well, when you have a public meeting, what's the biggest problem that you run into with this? And he said, well, the biggest problem we run into is at every meeting someone asks us what we did with all that marijuana money. The reality is that $110 million, give or take, is less than 1.5% of total funding. To the extent there is a problem, this doesn't solve it, and anything that leads the public to believe it does will in the long run damage public education.
I'm going to disagree with my friend Steve on one point and agree with him on another. There are two reasons I think that the big Denver-based education associations don't support this amendment. One is what he just said. They don't want a half fix. They don't want, even though we've got schools crumbling and security issues and no textbooks and no technology in the classrooms, they don't want even minute fixes that let the state of Colorado, or us, constituents, people think that there's not a problem anymore. We think that's a dumb way to govern. They tried a year ago on a $1 billion tax increase and failed. They don't want half a loaf. And this is a very small group of bureaucrats in Denver who are making these decisions. We think that sending this money directly to our local school districts, where we have a say in where that money is spent and how it's spent on our most urgent priorities, makes a lot of sense. This also scares the Denver bureaucrats to death because they don't want a formula where they're not at the top of the J curve getting more than their fair share of money. This is a per pupil amount of dollars that goes straight to our school boards. They don't want to see any funding formula that starts to get even money between us smaller and medium-sized rural districts and the big Denver district. It scares them to death.
Rebuttal?
Thank you. Every school board in the state had the opportunity to take a position one way or the other on this amendment. To my knowledge, there have been none that have taken a position for it, even though any one of the 170-plus school districts could have. There have been a few that have taken formal positions against it. So I think it is not limited to a small group of bureaucrats in Denver that have concerns about the effect of this amendment on education. But clearly, to the extent that school boards considered this measure, like several in Denver have, and I don't know about the outstate, but to the extent they've considered it, to my knowledge, they've all said no. And if it were a boon to rural or western Colorado, I would suspect that your local school boards would have acted in their own best interest and said yes.
Next question. There's the assertion or accusation that this is just an elaborate bailout for the out-of-state owners of the Arapahoe track. Mr. Pollard, your response to that?
I think it's a falsehood dreamed up by Missouri and Nevada corporations who currently have a monopoly on gambling in this state. The reality is that the casino that is, or the group that's put forward Amendment 68 has a long history of racing in the state. They have a long history of successful operations on the East Coast, and in fact just completed the purchase of a $250 million Hard Rock Casino property in Biloxi, Mississippi. So the talking point that this is about saving Rhode Island Casino is just ridiculous. This is a huge multinational company with several properties, and they've done a good job of diversifying their holdings in the last few years to make sure they're reacting well to market conditions. The guys I work for, the Twin River Casino, are not afraid of competition. It's the current monopoly in Colorado that's afraid of a little competition.
Mr. Durham.
Thank you. In 1992, the Colorado voters, by a significant margin, approved casino gambling in 3 mountain communities. They made a conscious decision at that time to confine gaming to those 3 communities. There is no monopoly in gaming in Colorado. There are over 30 separate, distinctly owned casino operators and licensees in the state of Colorado. Several of those are Colorado-owned and operated. So there is no monopoly. The question is, and it's very clearly presented, is are you going to give one company that's predetermined, there's no bid process for this, a license, a monopoly to do business in the Front Range? So to the extent that there is any concern about monopolies, that monopoly is a monopoly of a Front Range casino.
Rebuttal?
Currently, there is a geographic monopoly, and Steve's right, there are several owners, but the biggest, most successful ones are owned by out-of-state companies, just like the opponents of Amendment 68 accuse our company of being an out-of-state company. And he's right about Arapahoe Park. There is currently only one company who can qualify for that license. The competition and the breaking down of that monopoly comes when Mesa County and Pueblo County come online. And that's an open bid process. It's a total open process for those local governments to self-determine whether they want racing or not, whether they want a casino or not, and who the right person is to operate that. There's no monopolistic practices at all in that, and opening up geographically to Mesa and Pueblo counties.
Mr. Durham, I have a question here from a member of the audience. Can you name the company which will benefit from Amendment 68? Where is it located? Yes.
No, there's only one company that will obviously benefit from Amendment 68, and that's the Wind River Casino Holding Company that's located in Rhode Island.
And I would say that maybe the only casino company who will benefit, but with 2,000 new jobs and almost $500 million in economic impact, a lot of small businesses around Arapahoe County will benefit immediately, from construction to retail to services.
Your response?
I think I'd just like to quote the Durango Herald about the impact of this in Colorado. The Durango Herald said, what it would do is put existing jobs at risk, threaten historic towns, and clutter up Colorado's constitution for no other reason than to boost an East Coast company. We do not need it. The thought that there will be an additional 2,000 jobs created, I think, is pie in the sky if we've ever seen it. And one of the things to keep in mind that existing gaming revenues fund everything from community colleges to historic preservation. Those revenues are threatened by this amendment, and it is for the taxpayers, close to a zero-sum game, because what is lost in those areas will have to be made up from the general fund.
Mr. Pollard, how can we be sure that money will actually go to fund education?
You know, the amendment's pretty specific. It can't go anywhere but directly by pupil headcount to our local school districts. So the $114 million figure we've been discussing tonight is only once the Arapahoe Park facility is up and running. Doesn't include any potential future casino or horse track development in Mesa or Pueblo County. So it's sort of a lowest case scenario of what's going to happen every year once the casino's up and operating. And there's no question about where the money goes. You may have seen some negative ads that say, how do we know where the money's going? Well, that was a good argument for Amendment 66 and a good reason for Amendment 66 to have not passed, because there weren't good strings on the money and nobody knew exactly where it was going to go or what it was going to be used for. In this case, if your kid's in Garfield County schools, he's going to get $130, $140 a year directly to his local school board for their highest priorities, period. For Garfield County schools, that amounts to about $2 million a year in funding that can be used as your local school board decides.
Mr. Durham?
I agree. The money has to go to K-12 education. It'll be given to the local school boards. They will decide how to spend it, whether it is spent for football fields, or whether it is spent for classroom instruction, or whether it is spent for travel for the administration, is strictly up to them.
Rebuttal?
He's right about that. If we can't trust our local school boards and don't have influence there, then who can you trust, I guess?
Mr. Durham, what are the potential economic impacts and or burdens to host communities?
I'm sorry, could
To
you,
host communities, the impacts?
to the
burdens?
existing mountain communities?
Yes.
Well, I think around the country, it's been clearly demonstrated that gaming is a very difficult business. If you look at Atlantic City, the number of casinos, 3 recently of the largest casinos, including the Trump Casino, have closed. And they closed simply because of the location of additional casinos that affect their market share. So it has become clear that gaming is, if not a zero-sum game, pretty close to a zero-sum game. So while there might be some net increase in gambling in Colorado, it will not all be net increase, and in fact, I think substantially it will be net loss to the existing mountain communities, which means that the revenue generated by those communities for taxpayers will be adversely affected. So the effect, especially on Cripple Creek, which has a difficult market, I think could be devastating.
Mr. Pollard?
I think the opponents are approaching this as though there's only a certain amount of pie to be had and this new facility will decrease the pie. We don't believe that's true. Our economic consultants and experts don't believe that's true. The state economists and the legislative council don't believe that's true. $418 million of new revenue into the state is a significant amount of money. 2,000 new jobs is a significant amount of jobs. Our consultants have told us that in other places, and the analysis they've done here, the worst case scenario, the mountain towns might be cannibalized to the tune of about 15%. The $418 million dwarfs that 15% decrease. So this is a positive net increase in the economy of the state. It's a positive thing. These are 2 different sort of casino experiences. The tallest building between Denver and Salt Lake is the Ameristar property in Blackhawk. We're talking about in Arapahoe. It's not glitzy. It's not neon. It's a 1-story building that fits in with the current Arapahoe Park complex. That's more of a convenience casino. It's not a resort. You don't go spend 3 days there and have 3 nice meals and go to the spa. It's a place where you go on a Friday night with the guys and play some cards and gamble.
Mr. Durham?
Anybody been to Las Vegas lately? You may have noticed and looked at the statistics in Las Vegas, and even in Las Vegas, gaming does not account for a significant part of the revenue. Their revenue has been substantially cannibalized. And now if you go there, you find no inexpensive hotel rooms and no free buffets. If you look around the country, the evidence just doesn't support that there's no cannibalization when you have additional casinos built. If it did support that, then you would see gaming revenues increasing in those states where gaming is expanded. And you can look at Illinois, you can look at New Jersey, take your pick, but there is no expansion of the pie. By and large, people are gambling about what they can afford and what they want to gamble, and they don't have the kind of discretionary income that they had before the recession.
We'll go to closing statements. Mr. Durham and Mr. Pollard, 1 minute each. We'll start with Mr. Durham. Closing statement.
Well, thank you again to the Chamber for the opportunity to be here. I would simply close by asking you to look at a couple of things and to then vote no on Amendment 68. One, the premise on which it's sold, at a minimum, lacks support. There is no support among the education community for this initiative, and that is an incontrovertible fact. Two, do you really want to use the Colorado Constitution to name one company and give them a license to operate a 2,500 slot machine Las Vegas-style casino in Arapahoe County when the neighbors do not want this facility near them, and they will have no say in whether or not this facility will be built?
Mr. Pollock, 1 minute.
Thanks again, Mr. Milhorn, to the
You bet.
Chamber. Thank you for organizing this. And Steve, thank you. It's always fun to argue with you in public and in private. I hope you'll come away from this with two thoughts in your head. One is that the current monopoly in gambling in this state, when they come and say things like, it's so bad, revenues are so bad, we can't possibly survive and nobody else can survive either, it's a little telling that it's the guys who currently have the casinos saying that. We represent a casino with a long, long history of operations in other places, a long, long history of racetrack operations in other places. And two things Steve didn't try to argue tonight, which was the economic impact of this new facility, the one, not in Mesa or Pueblo counties, but just in Arapahoe Park, is nearly $500 million, 2,000 new jobs, and a significant stopgap funding source for K-12 education that nobody else has an idea for right now. There's no other money. There's no new money to fund those highest priority things except for this. So I think those two things are both good reasons to vote yes on 68, and hope you'll join me.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Next, we'll have Colorado Proposition 105. Gary Gilman, Right to Know GMO, in favor of 105. Chad Vorthman, no on Proposition 105, the Coalition Against the Misleading Labeling Initiative. Did I pronounce your name correctly, your last name?
Borthman? Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Just checking.
Thanks. It's not an easy one.
We'll start with Mr. Gilman, a 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm just one of the many grassroots volunteers that helped collect the 171,000 signatures to put GMO labeling on the ballot in Colorado this year, and a local business owner. Proposition 105 will provide Coloradans with the information they need when feeding their families and themselves. Foods are being genetically altered and engineered in a way that does not occur in nature. Those genetically modified foods, GMOs, are not currently labeled. Consumers aren't aware if foods they're buying are made with genetic engineering. To solve this problem, Proposition 105 requires foods that have been genetically modified to be labeled produced with genetic engineering clearly on the label. This is the first law of its kind here in Colorado, and the law is designed to be a reasonable first step. There are some exemptions for foods that are from animals or are handled under other laws, such as alcohol. Foods prepared for immediate consumption at restaurants are also exempted, as these don't currently require any labeling. Upwards of 70% of the foods in the grocery store will be labeled, pretty much everything from the produce through all the entire packaged foods, if you can envision that part of the grocery store. Currently, 64 countries, including Europe and Japan, require genetically modified foods to be labeled. U.S. food producers already provide that information to foreign consumers. Coloradans should have and receive the same information. We have a right to make informed choices about what we eat and what we feed our families. Proposition 105 is not a ban or a warning on GMOs. The proposition proposes labeling only. With a sharp rise in medical conditions like food and allergy sensitivities, autism, cancer, Parkinson's disease, consumers must read labels and demand transparency from the food companies. More than 39 laws are in the process in over 20 states to
Time.
require labeling of genetically modified foods. Thank you.
It's worth 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for coming out tonight. I believe that there is a right to be informed properly. But as you will see, Proposition 105 doesn't do what it claims it's going to do. It won't tell consumers which foods contain GMOs and which don't. It arbitrarily exempts 2/3 of all foods. It exempts meat, milk, and eggs, cheese, chewing gum, alcohol, but not non-alcoholic beer, medical foods prescribed for patients, and foods that are consumed in restaurants. So as a consumer, you're not getting the information that you want to know. This is going to hurt farmers, food manufacturers, and grocery stores. It will require them to install separate and costly systems for harvesting, packaging, processing, and transporting foods across Colorado. It'll limit the opportunities for future crop advances, which are very important in a state like Colorado, where we have a limited water supply. And in the end, this is only going to create more state bureaucracy and increase your food costs. There's no limit on the cost to taxpayers. An analysis of labeling propositions like this have shown that it will cost consumers, a family of 4, more than $400 per year. I encourage you to vote no on Proposition 105.
First question, we'll begin with Mr. Gilman. 1 minute response, and then a 1 minute rebuttal. One argument about GMO labeling is that without knowing what type of genes are inserted in a crop, the label isn't helpful. Most processed foods sold in America today, from beverages to baby food, include GMO ingredients. So how helpful is it to offer a label without specifics?
Well, we think it's very helpful. Right now, there's no labeling at all, and only 10% of the foods out there that are labeled if they don't contain genetically modified foods. Unfortunately, things like high fructose corn syrup are in almost everything that you find in packaged foods or in drinks and bottles, and almost all of that has been produced with genetically engineered corn. So I think it's extremely helpful to have the food labeled. There's a lot of mothers, their children have food allergies, and they're trying to, at their doctor's recommendation, avoid certain types of foods. The lack of transparency makes it almost impossible for families to shop and feed their families without this kind of labeling.
The truth is, consumers already do have a choice. They can buy organic, or they can buy food that's labeled with the non-GMO project. In a typical grocery store, there's 70 to 75,000 different items. Of those, approximately 20,000 are already labeled, either organic or non-GMO project. So consumers already have that choice, and they're making those informed decisions.
Rebuttal?
Can I respond to that?
Yes, 1 minute.
You know, not everybody can afford organic food, unfortunately. So there's a vast majority of the population that buys those packaged foods, and the foods in the 60% of the middle of the grocery store, and that's what they eat. Over 85% of those foods are genetically modified or contain genetically modified ingredients. And so at least this will allow transparency, allow people to pick up the label, read the nutritional content of everything else, and see that the food's been genetically engineered, the seeds have been manipulated in a laboratory in an unnatural way, and then they can choose if they want to buy that baby formula for their infant, or if they want to buy that type of food for their children or their husbands to bring home and eat with the family.
Can I respond to that?
Just no.
Fair enough.
Next question. Some argue that Prop 105 will result in higher food prices as farmers, food manufacturers, distributors, and retailers pass their costs to comply with the labeling requirements onto consumers. Do you agree or disagree with this statement?
I agree with that statement. It will cost more for consumers. And the reason why is through our food system is very complex through the entire food chain. This initiative has a unique requirement, a zero tolerance threshold. So farmers that are growing non-GM wheat will have to segregate their crop, their combine, their trucks and transportation from what they're growing with their GMO corn. And we know 80 to 90% of corn is GMO. That creates a huge burden on our family farmers. Those costs will be passed on throughout the chain.
Mr. Gilman, 1 minute.
Well, first of all, the Consumer Reports just came out with a survey recently that estimated a $2.30 increase per person per year for labeling. And you can check that online, Consumer Reports, same place you check out your automobiles and that sort of thing. There was a study at Cornell professors that said the maximum possible rise of this would be $1.42 per person per month. As far as the zero tolerance goes, that was left without a tolerance in there so that it could be determined by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And it's up to them to set whatever tolerance they want to. A lot of the other states that have presented labeling have made it less than 1%, and that's going to be up to the Department of Health in Colorado, not us.
With rebuttal.
It's not left up to the department. It says any, so that means zero. And that's unique from even organic standards or non-GMO project standards, which have a tolerance level. The fact is, this is going to cost a family of four more than $400 a year because food manufacturers are not going to label their product for Colorado. I agree. A label's probably cheap. The labeling part is probably fairly inexpensive. Where the true costs come in are the remanufacturing of goods and remanufacturing of our foods with more expensive ingredients. Ben & Jerry's has said that they're going to move away from having GMO ingredients in their foods. And they've already said, it was in the Wall Street Journal, it'll cost 15 to 20% more for those ingredients. We know it costs more, and that's where the costs come in.
Can I respond to that, please?
No, sir.
64
No,
other countries.
we have to move on. We have to move on.
What's that?
We have to move on. You can include it maybe in your
Okay.
closing. Next question, beginning with Mr. Gilman. 64 countries, including all the European Union and Japan, already have GMO labeling. Why or why isn't it a bad thing here?
Well, we think it's a good thing here. That's why I spent all summer volunteering at 30 to 40 hours a week collecting part of those 171,000 signatures. As far as those 64 countries around the world and in Europe, they did not see any noticeable increase in their foods whatsoever from this cost. So I don't know why it's going to cost Americans so much more money while it wasn't seen in the rest of the world when this labeling's occurred. And why the rest of the world is free to know what's in their food and have that transparency, and we in America don't have the right to know, kind of baffles me. Here we are in the land of the free, but it's none of our business what's in the food we're being sold.
1 minute.
Well, first off, we're talking about a state versus a country. So it puts Colorado food producers, it puts Colorado farmers at a competitive disadvantage. We sell crops across state lines, we sell foods across state lines. If you have to compete with farmers in other states, it puts you at a competitive disadvantage if you have additional record-keeping, segregation, transportation costs added in. Furthermore, it won't provide information about the ingredients like other countries require. Other countries require specific percentages of ingredients. This exempts 2/3 of all foods, so consumers really don't know in the grocery store what they're getting and what they're not. You have a right to know through aisle 4, but it stops at the dairy cakes.
Mr. Gilman, rebuttal.
First of all, the meat and cheese that are produced, it's correct. Colorado's a single initiative state, so we're only allowed to address one thing on an initiative like this, or it'll get shot down. It wouldn't have gotten this far. So we were unable to include alcohol, unable to include the corn and the feed that's fed to the animals that we all are eating. If you eat factory animals, chickens or hogs or beef, they're all eating GMO foods, and you're getting that secondary result of that. I highly recommend you eat grass-fed foods. As far as state lines go, there's this law affects things sold in Colorado, not things shipped out of state. And this also does not require any of the farmers to change their farming methods. If they're using GMOs, they can continue using GMOs. All they need to do is put it on the bottle or the can and label it, and they can continue. They don't have to switch and sell organic.
A question, Mr. Worthman. Some believe that labeling requirements may be particularly burdensome for small businesses and farmers markets since the measure does not provide for any exemptions based on an operation's size. Do you agree or disagree with the statement?
I agree. It puts a burden on it, and it conflicts with our own Cottage Foods Act that was designed to reduce the regulation on small farmers that wanted to sell it at farmers markets. It definitely is going to put a burden on those types of producers.
I don't know about anybody here, but when I shop at the farmer's market and when I'm out petitioning, trying to collect signatures for this, they're almost all organic and no GMOs in what they're selling. It may have a bigger impact on some of the smaller people selling honey or jams or something that they have a very limited supply of, and maybe they have a supply of labels that's going to last them 5 or 10 years. So there could be a small increase with the cost of labeling like that, but the fact is most companies change their labels very frequently for marketing alone, and this isn't going to have an effect on that that's significant or substantial.
Rebuttal?
I guess if the foods that you're finding at the farmers markets are already organic and meet those organic standards for labeling, then they're already labeled. So why add a second label?
They're not labeled, and the farmers markets only run for a few months in the summer, and we're trying to affect people that can't afford organic food so they also can afford to eat healthy all year long.
Next question, Mr. Gilman. Some say this measure conflicts with existing nationwide voluntary labeling standards that already provide consumers with accurate and reliable information on non-genetically engineered or organic foods. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I don't think it conflicts at all. The voluntary labeling standards currently cover less than 10% of the foods out there, and they're only just now starting to get people are starting now to label things non-GMO verified. If you shop and you find that label, you can trust that it doesn't have GMOs in it. Or if you buy organic foods, you can pretty much trust they don't have GMOs in them. But other than that, that's less than 10% of the food out there. So what about the other 90%? This measure, 105, will cover over 70% of the food in the grocery store. So I don't see where the conflict is. If these foods are as safe as the manufacturers are telling us, why are they keeping us in the dark? Why don't we have a right to know, like the rest of the world, 64 other countries, you can go there and pick up a can of food or packaged food, put it down, and know what you're eating. Why don't we have that right in this country?
I think it definitely conflicts. The national standards have a standard, and those have been set. They have tolerances for foreign materials. This has a 0% threshold, and that is an impossible standard for our farmers to meet when they're delivering their crops to the market. My biggest fear in the organization that I work with is that a farmer delivers a load of wheat to the grain elevator that had previously had a load of corn in it, and they get rejected by a government inspector. That's their livelihood, and that's their bread and butter. And this 0% threshold standard really hurts our family farmers.
Rebuttal?
Well, genetically engineered foods, all we're asking is to put a label on them. We're not asking them to make them organic. So the people that are already farming with GE foods, it's not going to affect them at all. They just got to put the label on there when they sell it inside Colorado. If they sell it across state lines, we're not controlling that. And they can wash their rigs out if they have an organic part of their farm and a non-organic part of the farm that grows genetically engineered foods. then they can wash their equipment out in between, or they can buy 2 sets of equipment if they'd like.
Mr. Verthman, regardless of whether or not foods produced with genetic engineering are good or bad, is there any harm in labeling foods so that Colorado citizens can make informed food choices?
The only harm is when you mislead someone, when you arbitrarily exempt foods like this does. For example, we know cheese, 80 to 90% of cheese is produced with an enzyme that's derived from genetic engineering. But that's exempt. That's not going to be labeled. You're not going to know that. You don't have the right to know in the dairy aisle. But sugar produced from sugar beets, when it's processed and sugar is extracted, whether it's from sugar beets or from sugar cane, it's the same sugar. It doesn't have genetic material left in it. It doesn't have any DNA left in it. That will have to be labeled because this is labeling the process, not the product. And we believe that consumers have the right to know, but they should have the right to know accurate information.
I don't believe there's any harm whatsoever in providing the label. At least if there is, it hasn't been evident in the other 64 countries that allow that kind of transparency, where people have a right to know what's in their food. As far as the sugar beets go, that seed for those sugar beets was made in the laboratory in a non-natural way that would not occur in natural. And I think the jury's out on the long-term health effects of this, and certain people would like the opportunity to be able to take certain kinds of foods out of their diet, often at the recommendation of their doctors, and they're just unable to do that today in this country because of the way the foods are currently labeled. So I don't see any harm, only positive benefit, where we won't be kept in the dark anymore, and it'll be our right to know what's in the food.
Rebuttal?
Just that it is going to end up costing more, and that it will end up creating a burden on our farmers.
We'll move on to closing statements, begin with Mr. Vorthman. 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you for taking time out to listen to the information I had to share. I encourage you to vote no on Proposition 105 because it doesn't do what it claims it's going to do. It won't tell consumers which foods contain GMOs and which don't. It's going to arbitrarily exempt 2/3 of all foods, so it'll leave you wondering as you go through the grocery store which foods are actually containing GMOs. It's going to hurt our family farmers, our food manufacturers, and put our grocery stores, especially along the borders of our state, at competitive disadvantages. And it's going to create more state bureaucracy and lead to higher food costs. Please join me in voting no on 105.
I'd just like to say that 70% of the foods in the grocery store are going to be covered, so I don't know where the other 2/3 are. Coloradans should vote yes on Proposition 105 because they have the right to know what's in the food they're buying and feeding their families and themselves. Genetically engineered foods were introduced to the food supply in 1996. They've been in the food system for almost 20 years, and companies have kept this fact hidden from the public. 64 countries around the world, including the European Union and Japan, already require labeling. Many U.S. food manufacturers already label foods containing GMOs for these countries, and they can do the same for us. And all of this labeling has happened without a spike in grocery costs. Companies should not hide what's in the food they produce and sell to Coloradans. We should not be left in the dark about the food we're buying. Proposition 105 would provide a basic label offering transparency and information to allow Coloradans to make informed choices about the food they eat and feed their families.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are a bit ahead of schedule. We will take a break and reconvene at 5:45.